Okay, so this week I'm going to be talking more about methods of production. Means of production are really key to being in control of your own practice and being able to practice as you see fit. So I think it's really important. Is one of the really, all this stuff is really important to understand, but I think that it makes a really big difference in what kind of an herbalist you're able to be if you are able to source your own materials and produce your own products. And it makes you much more resilient to economic changes and things like that if you are able to essentially proceed without a lot of outside input, without a lot of supply chain leading up to you or anything like that. So I feel like the more you understand about that sort of thing, the better off you're going to be, and the more resilient your practice is going to be, the better chance your practice is going to have of being something that you can do for a long time. Because I've seen so many herbalists who got into the world of herbal medicine, were really enthusiastic about it, tried it for a while, but found that it cost them too much to do. They had to buy all sorts of thises and that's and paraphernalia and supplies. And as a result of it, they ended up, getting burnt out on it or being unable to continue doing it, being able to afford to continue doing it. And I think that that's unnecessary. I don't think that really ever has to happen, because people were practicing herbalism before money even existed. People have been doing herbalism since before there were supply chains, beyond the ultra local chain of, you and a few people that that go out and get things out of the woods and fields together. And so that was the supply chain for most of the history of herbal medicine. History might be the wrong word. Most of the prehistoric existence of herbal medicine. So this time I'm going to be talking about a different and demonstrating a different method of production. So far we've talked about infusions and decoctions. We've talked about tinctures and making tinctures with maceration, where you put the material and the alcohol in together and let it steep. And we've talked about liniments, where you do the same thing with oil, and salves, where you do the same thing with oil and then you thicken it or harden it with wax or something of that sort. And and then we've also talked a little bit about poultices and compresses, where you're using water-based preparations topically, and washes, which is just rinsing something with an infusion or a decoction. So what I want to talk about today is a little more involved form of tincture making, which is percolation. Percolation, the basic idea of it is that you're pouring the extract, the solvent, the menstruum, the liquid that you're using for extraction, you're pouring that through the herbs repeatedly to take out the stuff that is in them. And so you're not, it's done more quickly. It's a little more labor intensive, but it's finished more quickly than some of the other methods that we have done, where you have to let it steep for a month. And if you do it right, you can get about the same amount of stuff out of it. It's not necessarily exactly equivalent as far as what the product is. There are tasteable, noticeable differences, but it is also a perfectly acceptable way to make product, to make a tincture. So in this case, just a second. I have got this herb right here, which is mugwort, and I've got 300 grams of mugwort. And what I'm going to do with this 300 grams of mugwort is make 1,500 milliliters of tincture. So it's 5-to-1 extract, 5 milliliters of finished product for every gram of extract, every gram of herbal material that I'm starting out with. I mean, so 5-to-1 extract, and I'm going to be using 20% alcohol, which I've already mixed. I have already diluted 40% alcohol by half with water to make a 20% alcohol liquid, which I've measured out the amount of that I'll need there. And so with this kind of tincture, with any tincture really, but with this one, you do have a little more control over how much finished product you end up getting, because you're running it through, you're running the liquid through until you end up with the amount of product that you want, which is not quite the same as when you have the tincture and it's soaking up some of it, and it can be a little bit nebulous how much ends up getting soaked up, but it's close. You know, it's still very, it's approximate, but it's still a pretty close outcome if you do it the same way. But with this, it's, what's important is not that it's 5-to-1 with 20% alcohol. What is important is that you know how much you're using and that you do it the same way every time, so that you know that you are getting able to get consistent results, or at least, because consistent results are dependent on a variety of factors, you're at least able to give a consistent input. So if I just kind of brewed something up without measuring it every time and gave it to the person until they seemed to get better, that might work out okay. That might work out okay. Most of the herbs that we use are very well tolerated, and you're not going to overdose on them by taking too much or anything like that. But it's better. It's going to give you more consistent results and more confidence in your own treatment and in your own process if you know that you're giving a consistent amount. So if I know that I'm giving somebody a teaspoon of this exact extract that is that's 5-to-1, 20% alcohol, or whatever percent and whatever ratio, but knowing that I'm giving it at the same time. So if it doesn't work on a subsequent time, I know that it's not because I didn't give the right amount. It's just that you know, nothing works all the time, but you'll get better results and be more able to compare results from one case to the next if the product is consistent. Sometimes people call this a standardized extract, and there's kind of a lot of confusion about what a standardized extract means. It can mean a lot of different things in different contexts, but in its most general sense, it means just that you made it a consistent way. You make it with a consistent recipe. So when you're making a tincture, it's a really good idea to make notes. I use these sticky labels. They're just little 2-inch by 4-inch sticky labels, and you can just kind of jot a note down. This says, you know, how you made it that time. And you might find that you like one recipe a lot better than another. You might find that, you know, making it out of fresh herbs with a 2-to-1 extract gives you a product that you like more for certain situations, for certain herbs. And that's fine. Everybody has their preferences and everybody has their processes. And if not only you, but a lot of other people end up finding it consistently works better, then it will probably, you know, become what a lot of people would use. But it's good to know exactly what you're giving somebody, and knowing the proportions and concentration and that sort of thing is important for that. So with this kind of tincture, let's see. I think I can. Is there a way to? How do I do this? Yeah, here we go. All right, so I have this bowl here, and I'm going to put the artemisia into the bowl, ground up herbs into the bowl. This would work the same for whatever herb that you're doing this process with. I'm gonna empty them into the bowl, and then I'm going to get it wet to start off the process. So I'm going to be pouring fluid through this. I'm going to have it in a funnel with a strainer, and I'm going to pour liquid through it. But if I wait to get it wet until if I put it dry into the cone, it's going to be hard to get it wet all the way through. Whereas if I already get water started in it, as soon as I start pouring fluid into the top of the cone, fluid will start coming out of the bottom of the cone. So it makes it a much easier, less messy process if you just go ahead and add some liquid to it. And it doesn't have to be a lot. And then we will let that sit for a while. I'm going to kind of stir it around a little bit so that it can get kind of wet all the way through. And I usually give it at least 10 minutes or so to soak up the liquid that's going into it. Because you got these dry pieces of plant material, and you're just going to have dry pieces of plant material floating around in water at first, or pushed underwater at first. But over the course of several minutes, they're going to start soaking up that water. And this is the crucial part, the water is going to start soaking them up too. Water and alcohol in this case. The liquid's going to start soaking up the material from the plants at the same time that the plants are soaking up the liquid. So we're just going to let that sit for a while. There we go. And so yeah, this process is called diffusion. And diffusion is just where in a mixture like this, something will dissipate from an area where it's more concentrated into an area where it's less concentrated. At the beginning, all the water is concentrated outside of the plant material, and all the phytochemicals, the stuff in the herbs that make them do what they do, are concentrated inside the plant material. And as it sits, that's going to change places. There's going to be water moving into the plant material, and there's going to be phytochemicals moving out of the cells in the plant material, out of the spaces in the plant material into the liquid. And that is how the process of extraction gets started. And then as we pour the water through it, it's going to keep doing the same thing. There's going to be diffusion of the phytochemicals into the solvent, into the menstruum, the water and alcohol mixture. And that's going to be a process that leads to, in the end, a tincture where it's even throughout. You shouldn't have to shake it up to get it distributed or anything. It's going to have the phytochemicals equally distributed throughout the liquid in most cases. Now, there are certain situations, which we'll talk about a little bit later, where there are things that precipitate out and it needs to be shaken up to suspend them because they don't dissolve. So yeah, question is there a specific reason for the percent of the alcohol that you're using? And yeah, it is like soaking rice. Specific reason for the alcohol percentage that I'm using. So in this case, the stuff that's in Artemisia is mostly really water soluble. I could make it with just water and it would be perfectly good medicine until it went bad. So there are some oils in it that are not as soluble in water. So the alcohol does help dissolve some of those. But for the most part, we could do this with just water with this particular plant. And so the alcohol there is mainly there to keep it from going bad, although it does help some with extracting essential oils and some other things. Now, if it was a plant with more resin in it, resins and some other substances dissolve better in alcohol. And so you might want a higher concentration of alcohol for that. 20% is a really low concentration as far as tinctures go. If you go to the grocery store or the supplement store and look at tinctures, most of them will be 50%. Some of them will be more than that. There will be low alcohol ones that have glycerin and alcohol that are 10% or something like that. 20% though won't typically ever go bad. It'll just sit there and stay 20% alcohol for, till it dries up or someone drops the bottle on the floor and breaks it or something like that. So very long-term, shelf stable. And that's the main reason that I'm using that percentage of alcohol, is that it gives shelf stability, and I don't need more than that for this. So some people really find the taste of alcohol objectionable. There's also some, it can be expensive if you're making large quantities of it and that sort of thing. But 20% is 20 or 25% are amounts that I use fairly often because they're strong enough to help with extraction, and strong enough to be shelf stable. And that's really all I need them for. But it's not that it has to be that exact percentage. You could do this with 50% alcohol, or 30% or something like that, and it would work pretty well. I'm going to just step outside for a moment and grab a charging cord because I don't have one. And my battery's starting to get a little bit low. Lovely sunset happening here. I'm really enjoying the fact that it feels like fall now. Hope everyone else is too, if it does in fact feel like fall where you are. You'll notice that the walnuts are losing their leaves, and some other trees are starting to as well. So it's moving towards what will be a few weeks from now when all the trees are starting to, not all, but a lot of the trees are starting to lose their leaves. Oh. Yikes. There. Be back just a minute. So now at this point, the herbs have pretty well soaked up the alcohol and water mixture. Just a second. What percent of alcohol would you say is good across the board, or should we base the percent on water solubility of the herb? Sorry if that's confusing. If you don't know water solubility of the herb, 50% will work for just about everything. 40% will work for just about everything and might be easier to find off the shelf depending where you live. If you know it's an herb that works well as tea, then you can probably get away with doing 30 or 25%, or sometimes even 20, just kind of depending on what it is. And when I say percentage of alcohol, I mean percentage of ethanol. So like if you buy vodka, maybe it will be 40% alcohol. And then you cut that in half with water. Now the mixture is 20% alcohol. And that's exactly what I'm using here today. I'm using Heaven Hill vodka, which is a locally made vodka, cut in half with water. And that's just kind of a very basic, easy thing to use, easy thing to do. So then I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it into this, a funnel with a strainer in it. You can get expensive, more complicated devices for doing percolation. You can also make a really nice one yourself out of a glass bottle with the bottom cut out of it with a glass cutter. But for this simple demonstration, I'm just using things that you can get off the shelf at a store that sells kitchen supplies like Meijer or Target or whatever, and this inexpensive. And so it's going to be pouring through this and into a glass jug. Let's see what I'm doing if I. So it's not in shot yet, so I'm just gonna start scooping this into here. You can see some of the liquid is starting to drain out of the mass of plant material. I'm just going to try and spread this around so that it's nice and evenly distributed inside. No matter where I pour the liquid, it ends up passing through a similar amount of plant material. And let's see, switch this around, show you something. So you can see here that already the stuff that's passing through has got quite a bit of color to it. And that's going to continue to intensify as we go along. So I'm just going to pour more of the liquid into here slowly because it's got to pass through. You don't want it to pass through really quickly. It won't take as much of the stuff with it. It won't take as much of the phytochemicals with it. But as you can see, it's coming out here and it's getting a good bit of color to it. Going in perfectly clear, coming out this color after passing through for just a moment. And so then that's going to be the full amount basically that we're going to have at the end. And I have switched this over to let it just kind of drip out a little bit, finish dripping. And that's going to so I put it into the other vessel just to let it finish draining, and then I'm going to pour the stuff that's already gone through this, I'm going to pour this back through the plant material, and it's going to take, each time that it passes through, it's going to take more of the liquid. The liquid is going to take more of the plant's virtues into the medicinal product along with it. So that's going to be something we do a few times. Usually you want to do that at least 4 times. You can do it more. You can't really do it too many times. Although at a certain point, you're not getting any more plant constituents into the liquid. And the faster it pours through, the more times you have to do it, which is a nice thing about if you do have a more advanced percolation setup where you can control the flow out, you can make it flow through more slowly, and it will, by passing through more slowly, it will take more of the plant's constituents each time it goes through. Also, if you use a piece of filter paper, like a very large coffee filter, in the strainer, that will slow down the rate of flow as well, and will also give you the same type of outcome, same process of more of the stuff passing through, more of the stuff being extracted each time the liquid passes through. Just a second. Jellies. Coffee strainer would work. I'm not sure what a jelly strainer is like. If using minced dried roots, how many times would you repeat? So if I was using minced dried roots, I would probably soak the roots before I started the process for longer than what I did with the leaves, because it's going to take a while for them to really absorb the full amount of water that they're going to. So depending on how hard the roots are, I might soak them overnight. And then I would basically repeat the process until it didn't seem like it was getting any stronger. So, probably 6 or 8 times. But that depends on the size of the roots. It depends on what's in the roots that's coming out of them. And it also can depend on the temperature of the liquid that's being passed through, because sometimes if it's hotter, it will take things with it that wouldn't go along with it if it was cooler. And that can make a little bit of difference. Although usually I don't do this as a hot process. Usually I just do it at room temperature. But those are all things that can matter. And with some things, I've done something like soak the roots overnight and then mash them up to try and agitate them and break them up into as small of pieces as possible. That can matter. That's what I was doing with licorice when I was making a lot of licorice tincture last year and was having to make it as quickly as I could. I was soaking the roots overnight, then running them through a blender, and then doing a percolation of the blended, because I was buying licorice roots that were coming in dried, cut, sifted pieces of licorice root from Frontier Herb. So, that's something that you can do in that situation, is blend it or mash it up in a mortar and pestle or something like that to get it into smaller pieces. And then it will extract more quickly and more readily. All right, so I'm going to pour this partially made tincture back through the plant material again. Again, the more slowly it passes through, the more stuff it's going to take with it. Even though it'd be possible to just upend the thing and dump it all out at once, it's better not. There was a little bit of plant material left in the bowl, stuck to the bowl, so I'm using the partly made tincture to rinse that out and add it into the strainer. And you can also notice if I use my pestle here to press down on this, it will squeeze some out of it, and it will also press all of this down into a more uniform heat inside the strainer. And there again, I'm just going to let that sit for a few minutes, let it finish dripping, and then I'm going to switch it back and pour it through again. It's kind of a tedious process, but that's how it goes sometimes. Sometimes producing stuff can be, this is a more labor-intensive way of producing a tincture as compared to just putting the stuff in a jar, putting the dry ingredients in a jar, putting the wet ingredients in a jar, and coming back a few weeks later. But it is also finished sooner. So if you don't have a month to wait and you really need the tincture right away, then that's a way you can get that. So would sun-warmed water / alcohol be beneficial in pulling from roots? Yes, it would be. Roots tend to contain starches. Mushrooms do too. And those are more soluble in hot liquid than they are in a cold liquid. So if you were doing it this way, if you were using this method, then having the menstruum, having the solvent be a little bit warmer would make a little bit of a difference in how thoroughly it pulls stuff out of the plant material. Could you use the same process with making something with apple cider vinegar? Yeah, you sure could. You could use water or vinegar. You could use oil this way in some cases, although oil is very viscous and slower to move through things, so it doesn't work quite as well, but it can be done. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter as much what the liquid is, as long as the liquid is capable of flowing through the plant product, penetrating the plant product and being absorbed by and then displaced from the plant material as it flows through. Cup of coffee.
Hey, Andrew. While you're sipping on your coffee, one question I have is, even though it's a percolation, does it make sense to store it with the wet ingredient just to keep it sort of,
Maybe. I mean, you can do like a combination of methods. Although if you're doing the percolation right, there's really not going to be much left in the wet ingredient, in the wet plant material for you to take out of it. It should basically be spent by the end of the process. So, you can, but there's not so much reason to. Another thing you could do is, this would be a really more out there thing to do, but you could make the tincture, take the wet plant material, dry it out, burn it to ash, dissolve the ash in vinegar, and then add the vinegar back into the tincture. And that way you've gotten every bit of the minerals out of it. That's called a spagyric tincture. It's something the alchemists came up with back in the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages or so. I don't make many things like that. I do make kelp that way because it gets more of the iodine out of it, which would be left behind by more traditional tincturing methods. But that is something that exists that people do, but it's not necessarily something that you ever actually need to do. I mean, you could have a perfectly normal herbal practice without ever doing that. But it is a technique that's out there that's worth knowing about. All right. Pour this back through. All right, so I don't know how noticeable this is going to be on Zoom, and especially with the two different materials that the plants, that the extracts are in. But at this point, it's clear to me anyway that the stuff in the plastic jug is actually a much lighter color than the stuff in the glass jug that's been through twice. So this has only been poured through, well, this has been poured through one more time than this has. So it's twice instead of three times. So it is still coming out darker than it's going in, even though it's not going in crystal clear. It's not as visible of a difference, but it is still getting stronger with each time that it's passing through. How long are vinegar tinctures shelf stable? So they'll actually keep a little longer. Well, they'll keep a really long time, but they get slimy. Okay, so the mother of the vinegar, which is like kind of the slime produced by the organisms that are turning the vinegar into vinegar, that continues to accumulate, and so they're I usually don't keep them more than a year, but you could, and some herbs will lose their potency just because of the changes in the compounds from the herbs, but the vinegar won't really go bad or turn into anything other than vinegar. It'll just kind of get slimy as time goes by, and as the spent microorganisms and the biofilm around them accumulates in the jar, which it will do less of if it's in the refrigerator than it would at room temperature. In fact, it might not do hardly any at all in the refrigerator, although that differs from strain to strain of microorganisms. But yeah, they keep a long time, but usually with most herbal things, I don't keep them for more than a year if I don't have to, because I can get more seasonally, and like I said, some of the constituents, some of the large molecules that are in herbs just break down into smaller molecules, no matter how well you try to preserve them, and that can change the efficacy of the medicine. I will pour that back and forth a couple more times, but that's kind of the general idea of what is going on with a percolation. Just kind of, passing the liquid through the plant material slowly and allowing the constituents of the plant material to be leached out by the moving liquid and end up in the liquid for the finished product. And it's a really good technique to have, to be familiar with. Takes some practice to get good at. It can be kind of messy because you're trying to switch back and forth between, pouring from one container and then pouring into the container and so forth. But you get used to it, and then it becomes pretty easy. Yeah, it does. I like the fact that there's more of a process, more of a hands-on process to it, that it's giving you time to actually be working with the herb, and you feel kind of like you're a mad scientist or whatever, just kind of doing your processing. It's very artisanal, I would say. All right, so I wanted to talk to you about a couple different herbs today that are more used in the traditions of Mediterranean and European, and to some extent Northern African herbalism, that are not as common here in the United States, but are still pretty well known in the herbal medicine community. And those two herbs are Elecampane and Vervain, which is also called verbena, but it's not the same thing as lemon verbena, which is a plant that essential oil is made out of, that's not really closely related. So Vervain and Elecampane are the two herbs, also known as inula and verbena. So first I want to talk about verbena. Verbena or vervain is an herb that is used. It was extremely highly esteemed in the ancient world. The ancient Egyptians called it the tears of Isis, and then later, I think they changed that to the Greeks, when they came to Egypt, started calling it tears of Venus, because the Greeks, wherever they went, they would kind of say that, Isis was their Venus or something like that. They did this sort of thing where they identified other people's gods as, the Egyptian or whatever version of their own gods. It's kind of annoying and confusing from a modern perspective. But anyway, allegedly grew from the tears of a goddess. That's one story about it. And it has a wide variety of different medicinal uses. Specifically, the above ground parts of vervain are what are used. And there's two main species that there are a lot of different species growing in the world. The two main species that I've seen being used as herbal medicines are Verbena officinalis, which is what the ancient Romans used, and which grows in the Mediterranean area and also other places in Europe and Asia. And then Verbena hastata, also known as blue verbena or blue vervain, which is native to the United States and is used in a similar way. So as far as what those processes actually are, it has a wide variety. It's a calming herb, and that's kind of probably the thing that it's most known for right now, is that it is calming, soothing to the nerves. It's pain relieving. It's also bitter and helps to it's bitter, and it helps with digestion, basically. So it's kind of been used for almost everything you can think of. Like literally in its history, it's been used for nearly every ailment. It's like sort of something that maybe some people would keep around as a one-size-fits-all type of remedy. It's let's see. Yeah, the main thing that you would see it used for in modern times is usually that it's calming, helps relieve stress, helps people sleep, helps reduce pain, and that sort of thing. So it's a comforting herb, and it's just kind of comforting in a lot of different situations, and that's probably a big part of why it became regarded as a panacea. Pliny the Elder, who was an ancient naturalist, kind of described it as being the most important and most sacred of all herbs. The Magi used it a lot. They were the oh, hang on a second. They were the herbalists and physicians and astrologers of the ancient Persian people, and it was a very highly regarded herb among them as well. Some people say that it was a highly regarded herb among the Druids as well, also, but that's kind of difficult to prove because the ancient Druids didn't really write anything down. But at least by the time that people in Gaul and Wales and Ireland did start writing stuff down, it was a very popular herb. Although, you know, it's hard to know if they learned it from the Mediterranean people or if they already had it or anything like that. But anyway, it's been a very popular, very important herb in European herbalism, and also in ancient Egyptian herbalism and in ancient Persian herbalism. So it's been, and probably other places further afield as well. But it's been one of the most highly esteemed herbs in written history, and now it's not as popular. You know, it's one of these things that I think it became commonplace, and then after it became commonplace, people started searching for more exotic, less commonplace remedies, and that's something that unfortunately happens a lot in health and medicine in general, in herbal medicine specifically. It's something that still goes on now. You know, I think it's something that even, for example, Tolkien commented on, and he was not particularly, you know, knowledgeable about herbal medicine or anything like that. But in one of his stories, there's this sort of roadside weed called kingsfoil that everybody's forgotten about. At least all the professionals have forgotten about, but some of the common country people and stuff remember it, but it ends up being the only herb that's helpful for a particular situation. So it's you know, something that you see a lot of, a phenomenon that you see pretty often with commonplace remedies being replaced by things that are less commonplace but not necessarily more effective. Hang on just a second. My ring stand has all these different adjustable things, and one of them is not doing what I want, and I can't even figure out which bit is not doing what I want. maybe that will do it. I'm not sure. Just a second. Okay. All right. So white vervain is similar. It's not as widely used, but it is similar. Has a lot of the same stuff in it and is a very closely related plant. As for whether it can be used on dogs, which was another question, I don't know. I haven't had that experience with dogs, and I haven't heard from anyone else who has, so I'm not really sure if it would work the same in dogs as it does in people or not. So, but verbena is a good herb to know about if, for example, if someone is having difficulty sleeping due to pain, that's a situation that I like it for. Or if someone is having muscle cramps and muscle pain and muscle tension, stiffness, that's making it hard for them to relax, making it hard for them to sleep, or just making it hard for them to move around. It's really helpful for that. It's also helpful for and I would often be using it along with other stuff in this scenario, but if someone is having digestive issues, like a lot of diarrhea or gas or something that's accompanied by pain and cramping in the stomach, as it often is, then verbena is really a helpful herb in that type of situation as well. More helpful than a lot of other antispasmodic herbs. Is it safe for children? Yeah, it's safe for children. It's definitely something you can use with human children. Just not as sure about using it in other species of creatures. The other herb that I wanted to talk about is Elecampane. Elecampane is Inula helenium is the Latin name for it, and it is also a very legendary herb in classical antiquity and in the herbal traditions of the Mediterranean area and the areas around it, including ancient Greece and Rome. It's kind of yeah, I will write it down. That I meant to send that to everybody, but no. Okay. Yes. So Elecampane, Inula helenium. It's a really weird name, and so the name Helenium, the name Helenium comes from the character Helen, who is in the Iliad and the Odyssey a little bit, but mostly the Iliad. She is named Helen. People call her Helen of Troy, but she's not originally from Troy. She's originally from Greece, and then she either gets kidnapped or runs away to Troy, I don't think they even ever asked her whether she went intentionally or whether she was stolen away in the story. But there's a legend that either that she was gathering the herb when they came and got her and took her to Troy, or that she cried tears as she was being carried away, and that the plant grew from her tears, much the way that the other plant grew from Isis's tears. I don't know what the deal is with plants growing from people's tears in these ancient legends, because really they don't like salt water that much, and also there would need to be a seed that came from somewhere. I don't know. I know it's supposed to be magic or whatever, but just sounds weird to me. Anyway, the plant is associated with this character Helen, who was the ancients considered her really beautiful, but didn't really bother to ask her whether she wanted to live in Greece or Troy or anything like that. So it's kind of their weird, I don't know, chauvinistic ways of looking at the world. But the point is that it's like she was considered to be, well, hang on a second. No, go away. Sorry, someone trying to call me. The idea that I think their idea was basically like that the spiritual power that she had through virtue of being really good looking was what imbued the plant with its medicinal powers. So Inula, Elecampane, the Inula part of its name also is like from Helena, but they kind of switched the lettering around. So it's actually just kind of a duplicate of the Helena part, and then the Campana part. It used to be Elena Campana, which is Campana was a place where it grew, which I think just means the fields. But anyway, it was a very well-known medicinal herb in medieval times, and it kind of had there were lots of plays where it was used as like a plot device because it was capable of resurrecting people, which it's not really, but it is capable of doing some really interesting things. One of the main medicinal constituents in this plant is a starch called inulin, a starch-like substance called inulin. And inulin is found in the roots of a lot of things in the sunflower family. So inula is in the sunflower family, that also known as Asteraceae or Compositae. Dandelions and Jerusalem artichokes are also in the same family, and they also contain the substance I'm about to talk about, inulin. And inulin is what's called a fructo-oligosaccharide, meaning that it's a starch made out of the sugar fructose repeated a few times. The fructo part is from fructose, which is like the kind of sugar you find in fruit, and oligo means few, and saccharide means starch. So it's a starch made out of a few repetitions of the molecule of fruit sugar. And when people eat this, our bodies don't digest it. Our saliva doesn't break it down into sugars the way that it does with regular starch, but it passes into our intestines and feeds the gut flora that are living there. So it is actually really good at nurturing gut flora and restoring gut flora after a sickness or after a round of antibiotics or various other things that can lead to the destruction of a healthy population of gut flora. Just say. Yeah, and some people, inulin doesn't agree with them. Some people, it causes a lot of gas. Although that can just be part of their gut flora population adjusting to different growing conditions. But for a lot of people after a sickness, Elecampane can really help them recover. And so if you've had somebody like, well, you see this a lot in children, but you see it in older people sometimes too, that after they've had a sickness that causes a lot of diarrhea, it's just like they've had a lot taken out of them and they're just kind of puny for a while afterwards. And it helps people to get over things like that. It also contains some camphor type substances, some aromatic substances, and then it also contains some other stuff. It contains small amounts of plant steroids and some aromatic anti-inflammatory substances. So there's a lot of different substances in it besides just the starchy stuff. So I will get into those in just a minute, but the inulin seems to be able to help with restoring the gut flora in people, and it seems to help with nervous system conditions as well. Elecampane in general seems to help with conditions of the nervous system like depression and anxiety, possibly by helping to adjust what the gut flora is doing and how the gut flora is producing the nutrients that go to the enteric nervous system. You got a whole lot of nervous system tissue around your intestines, and that nervous system tissue uses a lot of the resources that your nervous system has, as far as things like serotonin, acetylcholine, and so forth. A lot of that is being used up in those areas. So if we're able to nurture those areas, then you don't have as much of a decrease in you might not have as much of a decrease in neurotransmitters available in your brain, and that can make a big difference in how people feel. So it's been used for the digestive system. It's bitter also, and bitter and aromatic together. And that combination of bitter and aromatic for the digestive system tends to allow gas to be expelled and not cause bloating, not build up and cause bloating, which is really important, especially as you're readjusting somebody's gut flora, microbiome. And it helps to promote secretion of digestive juices and liver compounds and things like that. So it's kind of helping with the whole digestive systems process, which is going to help with the availability of nutrients, for instance. And this was an especially important herb in times before people had access to clean water, and would be important to know about if you were to find yourself in a situation where access to clean water was not as certain, because it's promoting good digestive health. And if somebody is getting a situation where they're having a lot of diarrhea or something like that, it helps to restore the system to normal afterwards. And it probably also helps to regulate what actual microorganisms are growing in your gut. It used to be used, and maybe still is used a lot, along with wormwood, which is a very strong herb that works against some waterborne parasites. Wormwood is a close relative to the mugwort that I'm making over here. Really wish it were possible to let people smell this by Zoom. It's not. We don't have that technology right now, but it smells really nice. Lots of aromatic compounds coming up out of this.
Andrew, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I know that mugwort is a relatively, abundant weed that I should be
Yeah.
able to find. But where does it typically grow? Because I haven't found it yet, and I'm mad about that.
Might be kind of late in the year for it. I mean, there's probably still some of it out there, but it really likes to grow in disturbed ground, especially like areas that have been tilled and then abandoned, like old flower beds or something like that. Overgrown areas of lawns or parks or along edges of woods and trails and things like that where they meet fields. Yeah, it's very weedy, but it's not very rural. Like there's more of it in Lexington than there is out in the country. And but yeah, it tends to grow close to human habitations and in places where the ground has been stirred up by people, but not real recently. So not like construction sites as much as gardens and flower beds and things like that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So with besides the digestive system stuff, Elecampane is really useful for the respiratory system. And that is kind of an area where this herb is still used quite a bit and where it is very helpful for things like asthma or persistent coughs. It tends to be really helpful. And part of that is because of the aromatic compounds it contains that are produced in oil glands on the roots. So with Elecampane, I'm not sure if I said this, it's the roots you want rather than the above ground parts. So it's the roots are kind of mucilaginous. When you chop them up, they're a little bit slippery, and they contain a lot of starchy stuff. If you cook them out into water, if you make a decoction of them, you get the starchy stuff out into water, but when it cools, it settles back out, which is not something that, not all plant starches will do that, but inulin tends to dissolve, tends to precipitate back out of liquid and just settle at the bottom of the jar or whatever. So it's the sort of herb that you might have to shake up an extract of to get the good stuff, because it does settle out. It only really likes to dissolve in hot water. So a decoction is a really good way to use this plant. Another way that is traditional to use it is as a candied root, where you would take the chopped up pieces of the root and boil them in sugar water until the sugar water is all gone, or until the water part of the sugar water is all gone, and you're left with just the sugar part of the sugar water. And that is candied Elecampane was a very popular remedy for many centuries for children, especially children with breathing problems. And as you can imagine, in former times when everybody's house was heated with wood, or maybe even burning cattle manure or something like that, people were exposed to a lot of low quality air, just like they were exposed to a lot of low quality water. We think of air pollution as being a modern thing, we get a different kind of air pollution now than what you would have gotten then. But if you've ever been in houses heated by wood, you know, sometimes some people have a lot of trouble with them. I personally really don't, but some people have a lot of trouble with breathing wood smoke. And for people that it's irritating to, something like candied Elecampane once a day was a really common remedy that people would take to keep their respiratory systems healthy. Just a second.
Bye.
So is Elecampane also known as horehound?
No.
All right, good job.
Okay, so they're two different things.
Different thing. Yeah. Horehound's in the mint family, and it's the plant, the above ground parts of the plant that you use with that. Elecampane is the below ground parts of a plant that's in the sunflower family. It has a flower that looks just like a little sunflower, or kind of like a dandelion. It's
Gotcha.
a yellow flower.
Okay, cool.
Switching back to verbena for a moment, I forgot to mention that another use of verbena that's talked about in a lot of traditional texts, but for which I have not used it myself, is to expel kidney stones. It is a diuretic, and it is also a diaphoretic, meaning it causes people to sweat. So it causes people to pee more, and it causes them to sweat more, which can be used for a lot of situations. So a lot of clinical scenarios. So if somebody has a fever and you give them verbena and it makes them sweat more, it will tend to bring down the heat of the fever. And if somebody has a kidney stone or urinary tract infection and you give it to them and it makes them pee more, then it will tend to flush out the bacteria and or the gravel causing the problem, and then, you know, be an effective way of dealing with those situations.
What
And
about for like cystine stones? Because those are kind of a different nature of stones. Would it work for something like that, maybe?
it probably would, because it's increasing the throughput and function of the kidneys. So it's you know, going to be helping to get rid of fluid throughout the body, and it's, I mean, move fluid throughout the body and get rid of material in the urinary tract. But it will also help with a situation like gout, where you have crystallization happening in the joints, because it's just moving more fluid through the whole body if you're taking a diuretic and then also drinking plenty of water to replace what's lost. It's going to kind of rinse out your whole insides. So yeah, I think that it would help, but like I said, this isn't this is something that that is a lot, that is promoted for a lot in classical writings, but not something that I've really used it for very much myself. And the only reason for that, the only reason I haven't used it in those scenarios is because I have other things that I do use that are, you know, easier for me to get a hold of, more common around here. So verbena is not one of my most widely used herbs, just for the fact that it's not something that a lot of it grows around here, and not the usual species of it either that are widely used by other people. This question of would it be useful for heavy metal toxicity? So the kidneys do a lot of removing heavy metals from the body, and it would probably be somewhat helpful for that, as would corn silk or cranberries or other diuretics that are making the kidneys work harder. But the trouble with heavy metals is that they get deposited in the body and they don't tend to move out from the places where they're deposited, because we don't have a lot of methods in our body for metabolizing heavy metals. Our bodies don't use them, and so we don't have enzymes or acids or things like that that would typically be involved in the transport of heavy metals within our body. We're just really not set up to consume them in the first place in any appreciable quantities. So usually if I know that somebody has some heavy metal toxicity, I use a preparation that is made out of hops. And it's just an extract of hops, a tincture of hops that's been set in the sun, and it makes some kind of chemical changes to it. And you get these substances called mercaptopurines, which are sulfur compounds that smell skunky. So these skunky smelling sulfur compounds are capable of capturing metals. They're called mercaptopurines because they're mercury capturing, and then purines are like, refers to the shape of the molecule. They're mercury capturing molecules, but they will capture other heavy metals as well. They don't know the difference between mercury and lead and cobalt. They just kind of know that it has a positive charge and that it's a heavy molecule. And so it gets kind of attached to the sulfur part of the compound. And then the body knows how to process sulfur. And so the sulfur is moving the metal around with it. And so it gets excreted through the kidneys that way. So that's what I would do in a situation with heavy metal toxicity. And in cases where I've been able to measure that, or where I've had the opportunity to have that measured, for example, in a person who had some implants in his hips that were recalled, and they were recalled because they contained lead and cobalt in the metal, and he was testing high for these substances. I wasn't doing this testing. The people who gave him the implants were, and they wanted to take the implants back out, but he was really too old to undergo the surgery. And so we were giving him this compound, this solarized hops extract, and it worked really well. We would do a round of it, and then he would have no detectable amount of these heavy metals for several months, and then they would start to come back, and then we would do another round of it. And we did that for the rest of his life, which was well over a decade. So it does work in a measurable way, and that's usually what I'm doing if I know that there's heavy metal toxicity, or if I suspect there might be based on a history of occupational exposure or something like that. So a simple diuretic would help some, but a lot of the time you have to do something to sort of chelate the metals or change the metals into a form that can be more easily moved around by the body, and then have some kidney support to help the kidneys get rid of the substances. Hope that's not too involved of an answer. So now, if you look at this, now that it's been through several times, I'm going to put it through one more time. Well, two more times to get it back into this bottle. But probably 80% of the extraction happened the first time through. You know, it's or at least the first two times through, the vast majority of it happened. So it's each time you do it, the amount by which it gets stronger gets less and less. Still going on for a while, but not nearly as much as the first through passes the first few passes through. Hang on a second. Good. All right. So then, Elecampane, to go back to that one, can be, so it's really helpful for congestion and wheezing. It helps to break up phlegm and it helps to reduce inflammation. And it probably also helps with constriction, spasm in the airways. Although I usually use it along with skullcap, or chamomile, which is more obviously relaxing to those. So it has multiple different mechanisms, or a couple different mechanisms of action through which it can help with difficulty breathing, and has been a useful herb for that. It can also be used topically for burns, and with that situation, you would want to either slice up fresh roots and put them on the burn if you have the opportunity to do that, or make a warm compress using make an infusion, or a decoction of the roots, and then make a compress using that, or a wash using that on the wound. And it tends to be pretty soothing and to take away some of the pain. It's like it soothes the tissue with the consistency that it has from the starches it contains, and then the steroidal compounds in it help to take away some of the inflammation, and then the aromatic compounds are also cooling and can help with the process of healing. So it's got a few different things that help in that regard. Skullcap is also safe for kids. Yes, it is. It's got a scary sounding kind of name, but it's not a dangerous herb. It's don't confuse it with monk's hood, which is another type of monastic headgear, after which they named a plant with a blue flower. But monk's hood is deadly. Skullcap is safe. It's in the mint family, and it does cause drowsiness, but it doesn't cause anything more dramatic than that. A nice thing about Elecampane as a medicinal herb is that it is very easy to grow. It's about as easy to grow as dandelions. You just kind of have to make a place for it and throw some seeds down, and it will pretty much do the rest. It needs sun, but it will tolerate a little bit of shade, and it doesn't really need fertilizing or manure or anything like that. It doesn't really need you to weed it extensively. It grows tall and kind of outcompetes most other weeds anyway. The leaves the leaves and the flowers can also be made into a tea. It's not as strong medicinally as the roots, but it does have some of the same stuff in it, particularly not the starch, but the other stuff, the aromatic compounds. If you're going to harvest the roots, you don't harvest them the first year. You let the plant grow, let it gather up some sunlight, store it in the ground in the form of energy. And then towards the end of the second season is when you want to harvest it. It will grow for longer than that, but the roots tend to start rotting on the inside and become hollow, and also become kind of tough. So if you harvest it the second year, you get a really nice product, a really nice root vegetable. Switch this over for the last time. Now, you may remember way back that I talked about 3 things that could help promote the speed and completeness of extraction of herbal material into a solvent. And those 3 things were the size of the plant material particles, the temperature at which process is being carried out, and agitation. In other words, stirring, mixing, things like that, pressing. With this, you know, like I said, I usually do it at room temperature, although you can use hot liquid, and it would make sense too for some things. The size of the plant material is definitely an area that you can make a difference to. You know, you can use powders, and it will take more through, although you will get more sediment, more powder that goes through whatever kind of filter you're using and ends up at the bottom of your product. But you can definitely influence the size of the particles. And, you know, there's not really as much opportunity for agitation. The water passing through it sort of is the agitation, but you can have the water hit harder by holding it further up. And in this kind of situation, that's a little bit like, you know, you might just get a splash and spill, but, you know, I can hold it a couple feet above it and have it pass through with a little bit more force, a little bit more pressure. And that's going to probably take more through in the first passes. You know, here at the end, almost everything is out of the plant material anyway. So there's not going to be as much change happening from doing that. So here's how it looks on kind of the final pass through. And I'm going to take the pestle and kind of press this down some. And there's quite a bit of liquid still being retained in the plant material up here that I can squeeze out. I could also just let it sit overnight if I wanted to. Yeah, I can just squeeze that out to get the last of it. And so that is a 1.5 liters of completed Artemisia tincture made since we've been talking tonight, and ready to be used. I can just sit that there to catch any remaining drips from it. But yeah, that's essentially the process with that. And you know, it's not the usual way that I do herbal tinctures. I prefer maceration on the whole, but it is definitely a way of doing it that is good to know about. Hang on a second. Yeah, now go set them on fire. Maybe we will do direct tincture in a subsequent class. I don't have fire going right at the moment, but it's definitely, it's like I said, with getting the potassium iodide out of kelp, it's something that I really like to do. It's I really like it for that part of the process because it's a mineral that you don't find in meaningful concentration in a lot of land plants. So it's good to be able to get every little bit of it out. And you know, sometimes people have just burned the kelp before doing any tincturing of it, which you can do that, but it leaves behind, or it leaves out or destroys the mucilaginous compounds, the slimy stuff that is also an important part of what makes it do what it does. And so I don't like that so much. Just a moment. I'll be right. Oh, sorry about that. So put on this. Let's see. All right. So then we can put a label on it to let us know when it was made and what it is, and maybe some details about it. So I could say mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, in case I forget what the word mugwort means. And then maybe something like percolation, 20% alcohol, 5-1. And I could say September 28th, 2022. So just something like that, sort of make it so if I don't remember what I put in this bottle, or if maybe an apprentice is working in the clinic and wants to dispense something, we know exactly what's in the bottle, how it was made, and if we wanted to make sure that person gets the same medicine next time, we can have it made the same way every time. And that way, you're giving them a consistent product and hopefully getting consistent results. So that's basically how you go about making a percolated tincture. Any questions about percolation or about either of the herbs we talked about tonight? What other herbs might you prepare as a spagyric or consider as a good candidate? Let's see, what else might I do that with? Nettle is a good one. Nutritive herbs in general can be good for that, because they when you're doing the spagyric tincturing, you're getting some of the minerals and things that would be in the plant that don't come out as easily into the liquid. Things like potassium and magnesium and sodium, maybe. And so if it's something that I'm thinking of as primarily a nutritive thing, then like nettles, I've definitely made nettles as a spagyric tincture. I've tried it with some other things and kind of felt like I'm not sure if that did much besides make it taste kind of ashy or kind of salty. A lot of the time it tastes a little bit salty and bitter, the extra part that you add in. I have done it with mugwort before too, though. Mugwort ashes are kind of their own separate medicine, which I grew up using mugwort for its properties for the nervous system and also for the respiratory system and to get rid of parasites. That's what we used it for where I came from. And that's what my family used it for ages. And then I went to Central Asia, and people were using mugwort in different ways that I wasn't familiar with. And one of those ways was to produce heat to stimulate acupuncture points. Moxibustion is the name of this therapy. Breathing in the smoke from it was another thing that they were doing along with that, which kind of relieves pain, makes people feel slightly euphoric sometimes, often makes people a little bit sleepy, often also helps with digestion that isn't moving or helps build appetite. So that was something new that I learned about. But I also learned that that you could use the ashes to stop bleeding on certain types of injuries, punctures and things like that. And ashes, at least when you first make them, they're pretty much sterile. So I have used the ashes by themselves, like sprinkled them on a wound to kind of cauterize the wound, stop bleeding and close up the blood vessels and form a scab. And this was something that I learned from some women who were part of this ethnic group called the Uyghur, who live in Xinjiang province of China, also known as Eastern Turkestan. And it was an area that the Chinese Communist Party took over around the same time they took over Tibet, formerly its own place. And so these people were sort of dissidents. And sometimes there were people who would come to us who had been injured fighting in some of the civil unrest that was going on over there. And so we used the mugwort ashes for some types of wounds that I would probably never or very seldom see in my practice here in a country that has access to other forms of healthcare. Things that people would have gone for to the emergency room for if they were here. it's actually really good for sort of cauterizing wounds at room temperature. So I have used the spagyric tincture of mugwort as a wash for wounds, where you just put the ashes back in and then use that to rinse out wounds, so that it's both having the antiseptic properties of the fresh herb as well as the cauterizing properties of the burnt to ashes herb. And so that's something that I've done that with. But most of the time, with most herbs, I'm doing it, more as a way of getting all the nutrients out of the herbs and into the liquid. So a lot of the time I would do it with things like chickweed or nettle, that I think of as being more nutritive types of herbs. What other types of plants can be used as ash to stop bleeding? I really haven't tried it with anything else. A lot of the time, if I want to stop bleeding, I'm going to do that physically, mechanically, like putting pressure on a wound or putting pressure upstream from the wound on blood vessels that would go to that area. So I haven't tried it with so many things. There's an herb called shepherd's purse that I use not in ash form, but actually as a vinegar extract, usually, sometimes as a poultice to stop bleeding. And that's definitely very battlefield tested type of remedy. And so, but that's one that I haven't used it as an ash form. I wouldn't use any kind of hard woods, because those are going to make something more caustic that could damage the tissue, and that's really not what you're going for. That would be an escharotic, which is something that like actually eats away flesh. And there are clinical situations where people do use things for that, but I don't recommend it as a do-it-yourself project, or as something, early in your experience of herbal medicine. So yeah, I haven't really used other kinds of ashes to stop bleeding, but probably the other artemisias would work similarly, like sage or wormwood or something like that. Maybe yarrow, but like really yarrow, the stuff that does the stopping of the bleeding is mostly, at least as far as I understand it, the tannins and the aromatic substances that are in the fresh herb. So I think that it might not work as well if you made it into ash for that. What the ashes are doing is that the mineral, what I think they're doing is that the minerals in the ashes are causing the blood vessels to contract and are causing everything to sort of shrink up around the wound, so that it's it's probably causing damage to that very outer layer of tissue, but that's already getting exposed to the air, so it's going to dry out anyway. And then it's sort of closing off all the blood vessels and things that go as they reach the outside, so that they're not continuing to put stuff to leak. Oh yeah, poor creature. Yeah, but yarrow, as an infusion of yarrow as a wash might be something that would work in that situation. Might reduce some of the pain and also help the tissue to heal some.
Andrew, I have something that I actually used on a kitten. Sorry to interrupt the conversation,
yeah. Tell me about it.
we found a cat at our house, we have an old abandoned house on our property, and it was really tiny and really sick, and it got a fly bite that lays like I forget what the fly is called. It lays the larva inside the bite.
Oh, yeah,
And so
wolfworm, yeah.
so that got really infected. We pulled the larva out of it, but then we put coconut oil and like broken up leaves of yarrow on it, and it got better within, about a week.
That's good.
And she was scratching the scab, so it would bleed, but for the moments the scab was on there, it was healing. So it's just I guess with animals, it does take a little more time because they don't know what they're doing. But anyway, that was my experience.
Yeah. Maybe humans are the same way. They don't know what they're doing.
For sure. Tiny humans, especially.
Yeah. All right. So, so not this weekend, but the following weekend, we're going to have the herb walk, and I hope that everybody can make it. And I have gone and scoped out the area a little bit and have some good plans about what we're going to look at and stuff like that. So I think it will be a good opportunity to get out. Fields in Kentucky are very lively this time of year. They've got a lot of stuff blooming in them, and just a lot of meadow plants are kind of having their heyday right now. And so we'll get to see some of that, and also some pond habitat, and a little bit of semi-forested habitat, new growth type stuff. But see some of what the trees are doing, and some of what the weeds and meadow plants are doing, and some of what the plants that grow by the water are doing. So it should be a really good time, and hope that as many people as possible will come. And if you want to bring people to this or anything like that, friends, children, anything like that, feel free to. And if you need any help with getting your plant collection rounded up and things like that, feel free to email me, and we can talk about that. Or if you're finished and want me to look at it, let me know. And the next, I'd say there are probably 5 or 6 weeks left, during which there are going to be a fair amount of things that you could still gather, but then it's going to be kind of wintry after that. And so
I have a question about the project. So some of my samples that I collected got a little bit moldy and just really unusable, unfortunately. So for those species that I can't collect because they're gone at this point, would a drawing or a picture suffice? Also kind of have like a mixed bag?
Yeah, if you wanted to do that, I don't have a problem with that. The main thing that I want is for everybody to be kind of learning some of the process of botany, and the learning to identify plants, and learning to see how the plants look like each other, and the Latin names maybe, and things like that. So
okay, cool.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that happened. Getting them as dry as possible while you're pressing them is important. If you're pressing them between paper, you want to use something like newsprint that's not glossy too. But some things just don't press well. There's no way to press a prickly pear cactus, for instance, without it molding.
Yeah, I have a question. I was trying to take spore prints of mushrooms, which seemed like a good idea until all the spore prints of the mushrooms I was getting are white and you can't see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
colored construction paper.
I've been taking it on white paper because that's like what I read online. It's like you can still see it like in the light if you turn it. But
You kind of can, yeah.
yeah, and like doing it on colored construction paper can like mess with, what color it turns out to be.
Mhm.
So I've been trying, but would pictures of like mushrooms, and I've been taking notes. I have a Peterson field guide to mushrooms, and I've kind of been taking notes of where I've been seeing things, and I've got pictures on my phone. Would that work too?
Sure, yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
Groovy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, does anybody know about a blue mushroom with white gills? It's like a little tiny little blue mushroom. I can't find anything about it online or in my book or anything.
Maybe look up indigo milky.
I did. I think those have blue gills. I could be wrong. Let me look.
You might be right. It's I'm not as familiar with the mushrooms, especially ones that are not, obviously medicinal or edible.
Yeah, the indigo milk has blue gills.
Yeah, it does have blue gills. Yeah, I am not sure what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. If anybody knows mushrooms, please let me know.
Is it teeny tiny?
It's pretty teeny tiny.
Send a picture to our group text.
Let me try to do that. I'm not even sure how to send pictures. I'm going to be 100% with you.
Well, my 10-year-old is kind of an amazing mushroom person, so I'll ask him if you can figure out how to send pictures.
Yeah. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I'll send a picture to whoever reaches out to me and tells me that they want to help me.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Well, hopefully everybody is, in a good place with that project, and hope to see you all. Well, we'll talk again before then, but I'm looking forward to the plant walk and getting to look at plants with everybody. And if you get a chance, maybe try doing a percolation this week and seeing how it goes for you. It's a good skill to practice. Good thing to try doing a couple times before you absolutely need to, and kind of get used to it. But it's a very convenient way to make tinctures quickly. All right. Any other questions for tonight? Well, thank you all for coming, and I will talk to you again next week.
Good night.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye, everybody.
Good night.